Welcome to our criterion referenced assessment application activity. In the next couple slides, you'll see an example of what we're kind of hoping for with this application activity. For the application activity, we would like you to take some time and review some of the standards and identify at least 2 standards that apply to the populations that you serve. If you only have time for one standard, that's totally okay. Copy and paste that standard into your learning log, take a screenshot, use your snipping tool, whatever works best for you. Then reflect on those standards from that criterion reference lens. Think about what criterion reference tools do you have to assess student progress towards those standards. Reflect on that, briefly describe your tools, and think about how they support you in assessing student progress towards those standards. Or, once you have those standards picked out and you're trying to reflect on tools that you use, you might think that this is an area that maybe you're missing some tools in, that you don't have a lot of tools to really assess those standards that could be really important for students on your caseload. Reflect on that. Briefly describe what you feel might be helpful and assist you in assessing that student progress towards those standards. And as you're working through this reflection, consider multiple lenses. We know that not all of you do a lot of assessments, so think about your role and try to think about this activity from multiple perspectives, whether it's initial evaluations, re-evaluations, or even that IEP lens. If you don't do as many evaluations, you can view this from that IEP perspective. Do what makes the most sense for you. If you are looking at it from that IEP lens, think about what could you do or what do you already do when you're preparing for those annual IEP meetings to really determine if your student is progressing towards, that 1 or 2 standard that you picked out to reflect upon. So if you are an early childhood SLP, we would like you to review the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards, or the WEMLs. We have the link in the application activity direction document for you, so you don't have to go and find that. And go ahead and read through some of that introduction in the WEMLs. It really does provide a nice overview as to what are the WEMLs, what is the intention of the WEMLs, and give some nice background information. And then once you've skimmed over that, then jump into reviewing some of the standards. I know some of you may be very familiar with the WEMLs. You might use these standards a lot, and some of us may be uncomfortable and maybe not as familiar with them. So just to ground us all kind of in a common understanding, the WEMLs are really meant to provide a common language and serve as kind of a guide for families, professionals, and other people around early childhood education and what we're kind of expecting. Now the WEMLs are set up and divided into developmental domains. You can see them here on the screen. We have health and physical development, social and emotional development, language development and communication, approaches to learning, and then cognition and general knowledge. For the purposes of our example, I am going to be focusing on language development and communication. Now, if you feel a different domain might be helpful just based on the populations that you either assess or work with, feel free to explore that. This is just for the example. Within that developmental domain of language development and communication, there are 3 subdomains: listening and understanding, speaking and communicating, and early literacy. Let's say for my application activity, I'm going to explore the speaking and communicating subdomain a little bit more. I can see on the left-hand side, there's a general developmental expectation. And then on the right-hand side, there are some performance standards. And these just kind of outline what we would like our students to be able to do. As I get to more of the speaking and communicating subdomain, I'm looking and I can see that developmental continuum on the left-hand side. One thing to note with the WEMLs is that it does have that developmental continuum for a reason. It has developmental sequences, abilities that are demonstrated by typically developing children, but it does acknowledge that not all children go through this same kind of continuum of development. They may jump around a little bit. It may be unique to each child. And so I think it's important just to realize that they highlight some of the big things that we often see with most children, kind of those early developing skills all the way to some of those later developing skills. but we always know that not every single child is going to fit kind of that same continuum, that same order of development. So as I'm reflecting on this standard here, the speaking and communicating performance standard for my application activity, I can see that, early on, a child is going to use coos, cries, and other noises to communicate. I go down that continuum. Eventually, they use one word. As I keep looking down that continuum, I see it uses 2 to 3 word phrases and sentences. And then if I want to make some comparisons, have a little bit more concrete criteria or expectation for the family or for my team members, I can make some comparisons to ASHA's developmental norms. I can see that right around that age 2 to 3 is when we start to expect 2 to 3 word phrases or sentences. If we keep looking down that continuum, we can see eventually we want to see plurals, pronouns, past tense. Again, that occurs right in this age 2 to 3. Then we want more multi-word sentences, more adult-like speech. Again, towards the end of that 2.5, 3-year-old age, we want to see our students giving reasons, asking and answering questions. We know that requires a higher level of language, more complex language. So right there, we have made the WEMLs just a little bit more concrete. We have our criteria, we have our expectation with ASHA's developmental milestones. So if your families are wondering, your teams are wondering, ASHA has a great resource out there that have been newly updated that you can help kind of use in conjunction with WEMLs to put more concrete ages to certain skills for families. So the next part of the application activity is to do some reflection around what kind of tools do you have to assess your students' progress towards these standards. Now I know for early childhood, it may be quite obvious or even kind of easy to answer: play, observation, language sample, interview, etc. So as you choose your standards, try to think about what are some ways that you use to assess that progress towards those standards. Or are there things that you might be missing? If you maybe step out of the speaking and communicating subdomain, and let's say you explore some of the other domains or subdomains, is there something that you either have or that you wish you had to look at some of those standards? So in my example, I showed that the WEMLs are related to the developmental checklist from ASHA. As you approach this application activity, choose a standard. You can even use the early communication ones that I shared in this example. If you use some tools like the Rossetti, the communication matrix, another developmental scale, or some other informal criterion referenced assessment, you can describe how it aligns with the standards like I did. Or if you don't have anything that comes to mind, you can also describe types of things that you think would be useful. Feel free to explore different domains on the WEMLs. If you are pretty familiar with the language development and communication standards, feel free to go outside of that. If there's another domain that makes more sense based on the students that you serve, the students that you engage with, go for it. Challenge yourself to expand beyond just those language development and communication standards if you're ready for that. And choose some of those standards that resonate with you and that you think might be really beneficial for you to do some exploration and reflection upon. If you have a great system in place where you're pairing high quality criterion referenced assessments with the standards, we would love to learn more about it from you. We know from talking with district leadership teams that there are inconsistencies in this area, so your colleagues as well as us would love to hear what you're doing. So feel free to email me any resources that maybe you're willing to share so that we can start to build a set of criterion referenced assessment resources that all SLPs might benefit from. One final reminder, if you haven't already, please fill out that module completion survey. And if you have any questions or need support, please reach out. And we hope that you have a good rest of your day.